Well, that doesn't take long, folks, for the blame game to start. Start blaming the United States for South Africa's failure to address its HIV crisis for decades now. Headlines today when Donald Trump permanently canceled PEPFAR and people are already screaming bloody murder. Headline in News 24, U.S. funding crisis, 500,000 more HIV deaths possible, say organizations. Well, first, folks, there is no U.S. funding crisis. President Trump is ending our crisis by cutting expenditures, especially in countries that undermine U.S. national interests, places like, oh, I don't know, South Africa. The harrowing impact of the decision to can U.S. funding for local HIV/AIDS organizations was laid bare at a press conference hosted by Change South Africa Thursday afternoon. With the virus now expected to claim more than 500,000 additional lives over the next decade unless the government can find a way to plug the giant hole left behind. 500,000 lives lost. Lions and tigers and bears, oh my. You know, ANC officials keep harping that PEPFAR covers only 17% of HIV spending. Well, I guess that 17% is far more impact than the ANC will admit. Well, of course it does. Much of that money is spent for prevention, stopping the wound, not stopping the bleeding, which is far more cost effective. We will see lives lost. In excess of 500,000 unnecessary deaths will occur because of the loss of funding, says Professor Linda Gale Becker. She's telling attendees at the Change South Africa press conference. She cited a modeling study that she and her team at the Desmond Tutu Health Foundation recently published. Those 500,000 unnecessary lives lost. Would that be like the unnecessary 650,000 lives lost, courtesy of Thabo Mbeki? Have we forgotten the treatment action campaign, Ms. Becker, forcing the government to take action after years of inaction? South Africa would not be in the boat that it currently finds itself sitting in without an oar if Mbeki had not been a denialist. If the ANC had actually devoted adequate resources to fight HIV after Mbeki had left office, if HIV were actually an important issue for the government, unlike other countries in Southern Africa where HIV is constantly and openly discussed and debated, it's everywhere in public life, billboards, television, conversations, government offices, campaigns, all the time. The topic is barely visible in public life in South Africa. South Africa was given 22 years to sort this out. It was only supposed to have 5 years, but the American taxpayers' generosity kept it going for 22 years. Ms. Becker, the warning signs of what was to come became apparent in February of 2024 during the Biden administration when bipartisan members of the House of Representatives sought to reconsider the relationship with South Africa. What preparations have you and the Desmond Tutu Foundation done since then? Now, Becker said as many as 500,000 additional new infections were expected. New infections? How exactly is that PEPFAR's problem? I suggest you get busy with the ABC abstinence, being faithful, and condomize campaigns forthwith. The South African government has an obligation and duty to act with urgency to respond to both these drastic cuts and the attack on South Africa's HIV and TB programming. Further inertia and lack of urgent planning will certainly lead to increased death and suffering. Well, at least she does place the task squarely where it belongs, in Pretoria. But she's still blaming America. No one's attacking your programs. Take responsibility for your own mess. Speaking at the press conference, she said, it's not hyperbole to say that I predict a huge disaster, a walk back on the investment, unless other resources can be found and found urgently. This is not going to be business as usual. We're going to see this epidemic walk back as a result of this. Well, one thing for certain, ladies and gentlemen, is that we will see plenty of the sky is falling, Cassandra-like rhetoric like this, blaming America for the actions of South Africans. Crying wolf, blaming America. Now, I suggest rather than compound the situation with this inflammatory rhetoric, which is not going to lead to the money coming back, pissing off America is not going to make the money come back, spend a few minutes looking for solutions, Ms. Becker. South Africa's 2023 budget was 2.24 trillion rand, or $118 billion. Surely the government can find a way to squeeze out funds for HIV prevention from that. If not, get the captured media, which seems to be slavishly devoted to promoting the ANC and its corrupt government, get them to do it for free. Beyond that, rather than make our grandchildren in 30 years pay 3 times what we borrow today to pay for the consequences of South Africans' personal decisions, look closer to home for charity. The top wealthiest group of South African elites is worth north of $30 billion in assets. Johan Rupert, Nicky Oppenheimer, Koos Becker, Patrice Motsepe, Michel Leroux, Christopher Visa, not to mention Burger Boy Bob, Cyril Ramaphosa, who has a few hundred million in assets from Big Macs and Palo Palo. Go ask them for generosity rather than blame Americans for South Africa's failures. The ANC brought this on, and you're going to have to deal with it. Turn to the ANC for solutions. Or turn to South Africans who have plenty of money. It's not our responsibility to bury our grandchildren in unsustainable debt for your consequences and your behavior today. There you have it, South Africa. What say you? Cheers.